So we're going to start our first session today, and we're going to talk about the FAFSA, and we're going to talk about what we've learned and where things stand. And like I said, things are changing every single day. So we're just going to do our best to give you an update of where things stand today. Please put questions that you have into the chat, and we'll do our best to address those either in the moment. We'll take questions that you can share. I'm having a terrible time. I'm going to get better at this today. It's early, not enough coffee. You can put your questions in the chat. We'll do their best to address them either during the session or we'll follow up in email. All right, first what we're going to do is we're going to talk about FAFSA completion and processing updates. So as you may well know, the FAFSA was soft launched on December 30th. The first 10 days were really tough. I think that first day in December that it was available on the 30th, the site was actually up for about 30 minutes total throughout the day. By about the 8th of January is when we saw the site available pretty much 24/7, except for regular maintenance. So those first days were difficult, but they did address things very quickly. And before long, as we started to move through the month of January, we were finding that people were able to get into the FAFSA and submit the FAFSA. That being said, there have been some very common FAFSA completion issues. And some of those issues include that we have a lot of FAFSAs out there where the required signatures were not held. I'm not going to say they were not provided, because our experience is that people did provide signatures that somehow through the process ended up getting dropped. So for people who have been working with FAFSAs, you know that there is a student segment and a parent segment when you're doing a dependent student's FAFSA. And so what was happening is maybe the student was doing their section and signing it, and then the parent was doing their section and signing it and submitting it. And then lo and behold, they got notification that an SAI, a student aid index, could not be calculated because there was a missing signature. So that is fixable, not yet, but that is fixable. But we know we have a lot of FAFSAs out there with that scenario. The other scenario that we saw a decent amount is that there was a question on the FAFSA that I'm going to show you in a little bit that asked the student if they wanted to apply for an unsub only. A student would do that in a situation where their parents refused to provide information on the FAFSA. So they're not a situation where a student had special circumstances, but just a scenario where the parents say, you know, I'm not willing to provide you any information. Under those circumstances, a student is eligible to get an unsub loan only. So that question gets asked on the FAFSA so that students can self-identify that that's their situation and can get a FAFSA submitted. However, the intention was that that only be answered by people whose parents refused to provide information. The way the question was worded, and I'll show you it in a little bit, was not great. And it was a very, I don't want to say it wasn't intentionally misleading, but it was a confusing question. So we are finding that many more students whose parents are perfectly willing to provide information on the FAFSA indicated yes to that. And so their FAFSA was submitted without parent information, because in that scenario, the parent section is never even available. Okay, so these scenarios are ones where an SAI, that student aid index, was not calculated and follow-up will be required. So we're going to talk about what needs to happen next in a moment, but I just want to say that we do have FAFSAs out there where there have been some challenges. We're also seeing, and unfortunately continue to see, some increased challenges with FSAIDs, with those federal student aid accounts, those username and passwords that people use to get into the FAFSA and studentaid.gov. We are seeing that just many more people are having to call federal student aid to get assistance in using their FSAID. I don't know for sure, but it seems like they might have tightened up security, or they did something behind the scenes so that we're just finding that people maybe who've been able to use their FSAID in the past are having issues with it. So we wish that we could resolve these issues. In the past, we had been able to resolve most of the FSAID issues, but this year, more often, we are having to have people call federal student aid to get those issues resolved. That is problematic, because when people call federal student aid, as you probably know if you've experienced this yourself, there's a very long wait time in many cases, and calls literally are just getting dropped. So people wait on hold and then the call gets dropped. So that's really frustrating to people, and we know that. So we're doing our best to, resolve any issues that we can so that people don't have to call, but we are having more often than we wish to refer people to federal student aid. Now, with those challenges, I want to say that there is a lot of good news. So many students have been able to successfully complete a FAFSA and are reporting that it was much easier than they thought it was going to be. So, for example, something that we heard very regularly, especially in the beginning, was that was too easy. I think I made a mistake because it was simpler than I thought it was going to be. It truly is a much easier FAFSA when it works well. Obviously, we have some bugs still to get worked out, but the reality is independent students are getting this done in less than 15 minutes. I'm seeing 8 to 10 minutes. And dependent students have to do both the parent section and the student section, but it's taking them both, less than probably 20 minutes, 15 minutes maybe. So I think getting FAFSAs done in a total of a half an hour to 45 minutes is going to be the reality for the vast majority of individuals. So again, continuing on with the good news, FAFSA processing has begun. So that's wonderful, and we're going to talk about where things stand with that. But what was supposed to have happened is initially FAFSAs were going to be processed in January. So we got the announcement in November that FAFSAs would start, the FAFSA would be available by the end of December. People would submit their FAFSAs, but no processing was going to take place until the end of January. Well, on January 30th, they announced that, guess what? We're not going to start processing FAFSAs yet. But the reason that they didn't start processing in January was because there are some tables in the FAFSA calculation that are used to calculate that SAI, that student aid index. And those tables protect a portion of a family's income. Those tables had not been updated to reflect inflation. How it got missed, we knew this was the case back in the fall, but it was not an easy fix apparently. But in January, they decided, you know what, we've got to go ahead and make that fix. So making that fix is what caused the delay from January until March. And the reason that I'm mentioning this is because that fix is a good thing. Because updating those tables means that more of a family's income is protected, which means that their student aid index is lower. The lower the student aid index, the better. So it means that this update to these tables, this delay, did result in students having lower SAIs and more students being eligible for a Pell Grant, and those who are already eligible for a Pell Grant maybe being eligible for a larger Pell Grant. So for example, we saw some families where we ran some calculations, and as a result of these table updates, they were eligible for an additional $2,000 in Pell Grant. So even though this delay has been frustrating, we do want to emphasize that it was beneficial, and it does mean that the students are going to be eligible in many cases for more financial aid. So now let's actually focus on FAFSA processing as to where things stand now. So processing began last week. Actually, March 10th was when they processed their first few FAFSAs, with larger batches being sent now. Most schools should have received at least one record. We've received, I don't have today's numbers, but I think as of yesterday, we had received 24,000 records. Now, keep in mind that represents about a little under 7,000 students, because multiple students will list multiple colleges on their FAFSA often. So that's why the number of students and the number of ICERs or records is different. So we've got records for about just under 7,000 students. So that's good. I believe FAFSAs have been processed through approximately January 21st as of yesterday. FAFSAs are being processed on this first in, first out basis, which basically what that means is that the people who filed earliest are the people whose FAFSAs are being processed first. Now, I am going to say I have heard some people who filed early in January, 6th, 7th, 8th, or like something like that, and their FAFSAs have not yet been processed. But we are working to get answers to those questions as to, most people in those dates have been, but a few haven't. So we're trying to learn as much as we can about how that processing is going. So FAFSA processing is continuing to ramp up, and I see that I'm missing a quote there at the end of that, so I will fix that. Once fully ramped up, federal student aid is saying that it will take about 2 weeks to clear the backlog. What we don't know today, but we are asking, is have we gotten to the point that they are fully ramped up? So when does that 2-week clock start? So we don't know the answer to that right now, but that's the sort of information that we will make sure that we share with you as soon as we know it. If people are filing a FAFSA now, what's happening is they are going to the back of the queue. So still going to go in that date order. So people can be submitting their FAFSA now. Please be sure students are submitting their FAFSA and just know that they'll be added to the end of the queue and processed as we continue to move through that backlog. So what are parents and students seeing? So once the FAFSA has been processed, students will be able to see that their FAFSA status has been updated by logging into their studentaid.gov account with their FSA ID. Parents will also be able to see a status update. So here is a real live FAFSA. This is mine. I have a fake student here that I just did a pretend FAFSA with, but this is my actual real live FAFSA. So when I log into studentaid.gov with my FSA ID, this is where it takes me first. So this is the dashboard. And in the dashboard, I can see that my FAFSA has been processed. So that's really good news. I submitted a FAFSA on January 3rd. Up here, you can see where you have your various options. I wanted to highlight this just because we're going to go to the My Activity screen in a moment. But there are other things that you can do here, including updating your setting information. So when you're working with students and families, and maybe the student used their high school email address, or maybe they've had a change in their physical address, under settings is where they will go to update their information. And it's really important that people keep their FSA ID information up to date, because not only will they use this FSA ID to file their FAFSAs in the upcoming years, they will also be using that FSA ID to get into studentaid.gov and keep track of their loans and as they go into loan repayment. So people are using these FSA IDs for years and years to come. Keeping that information up to date is critical. All right, so I wanted to show you something that I noticed when I logged into my account. So over here, you're going to see that, like I said, my FAFSA was processed. So that's great. But this, I just want to, not assuming that people are going to see this and be concerned about this, but I wanted to point this out. Do you see where it says submitted 315? It was not submitted 315. It was submitted on January 3rd. And that is the date that schools will use when if I think schools are being flexible about their deadlines to the extent that they can. But in terms of if there are deadlines and submissions are required by certain dates, it will be the day the FAFSA was actually submitted, which in my case was on January 3rd. But I am concerned that some students might see when they go to their dashboard that it's the date that it was actually processed, okay, even though it says submitted. So I just wanted to highlight that and reassure people not to panic if they see that date. It's this date in the My Activity section that is going to be the date schools and other organizations will use when they're focused on deadlines, okay? So what we expect is that once a FAFSA has been processed, a FAFSA submission summary will be available. I'm going to show you what that looks like in just a moment. Students will be able to view the answers they provided on the FAFSA. They will not, however, see income information if that income information came over directly from the IRS. If it came from the IRS, then it cannot be displayed. It's considered FTI or federal tax information, and it will not be visible. On the other hand, there are families that had to enter their tax information manually. If their tax information was entered manually, they will be able to see that on the FAFSA submission summary. The SAIs that were estimated initially when the students submitted their FAFSA, assuming one was calculated, are automatically being recalculated using those updated tables. So you would anticipate in many students' cases that their original SAI that they received in an email when their FAFSA was submitted is now lower because of those updated tables. So that's what we believe is going to be the case in the vast majority of situations. Maybe not all, but in lots of them. Now, emails are going to be sent in the coming weeks to let students know that their FAFSAs have been processed. And our understanding is that just like the initial submission of the FAFSA, the email went only to the student, that probably these emails are going only to the student as well, but they will let the students know that their FAFSAs have been processed. Normally, that email would be sent immediately, but for a variety of reasons, I think because they can't make corrections yet, which is the next point, they're not actually notifying students yet that their FAFSAs have been processed. That will come, but if students want to check their status, they can just go directly to studentaid.gov and log in and see whether their FAFSA process has changed from in review to processed. So no corrections can be made though. And we know this is really frustrating for students and parents. We have them out there that know they need to make corrections. They've known for 2 months they need to make corrections and they're chomping at the bit to do it. But no corrections are going to be able to be made until that backlog has cleared. When that backlog is going to clear, we don't know exactly. I would say we're talking I hate to even put dates on it, but it's still going to be a little bit. I know it's not going to happen next week. I can pretty much say that with confidence. So when a student goes to their studentaid.gov account, logs in with their FSA ID, and they click on that link that says the 2425 FAFSA, here is what they're going to see. So they're first of all going to see that their FAFSA has been processed. It's going to tell them to check back that they can't make corrections yet, but they will be able to. Just some basically identifying information. They're going to see their tracker. So their form was started, it was submitted, and it's been processed. So that's the good news. Now down below this, so this was actually just below, but I wanted to call it out but still have you be able to read the screen. You're going to see that down below where it says processed, they are going to see this here. They're going to see this box that says your FAFSA submission summary is ready. And then they will click on that link, and that's how they can see their FAFSA submission summary. Now, on the parent side, they only see the tracker. So on the parent side, there is no link to the FAFSA submission summary. That only exists on the student side. Now, when they go into their FAFSA submission summary, here is what they see when they initially log in. So again, I know you can't quite read this, but I just want to highlight a few things that are there. So again, telling them that they have to check back for corrections. But the most critical pieces I wanted to highlight is there are basically 4 tabs. There's the eligibility overview, which is what we're seeing now. There are the FAFSA form answers. There's school information and next steps. And I just want to point out here where it says next steps and it has a little red exclamation mark. Everybody has a red exclamation mark. So people don't need to be like, oh my gosh, something is wrong. Everybody is seeing that red dot there with the exclamation mark in it. So I am here on the eligibility overview. It tells me kind of what they can tell me about. So I did a FAFSA as if I was going to grad school. So it tells me what my loan eligibility would be. It tells me I might be eligible for work study. If students were eligible for a Pell Grant, it would show that there. Keep in mind, first of all, these are only estimates, and these are the only things that can be predicted based on the FAFSA having been filed. So for example, most of the aid that is available, or much of the aid that's available, comes from the school or from the state. So they can't tell you any of that on the FAFSA submission summary. It's not until the school is able to get a financial aid offer out that we're going to see things like Maine State Grant eligibility or an eligibility from the school itself. So I know students panic about that sometimes. Like, is that all? No, not necessarily. Is that all? So then what you're going to see as you move down, if an SAI was able to be calculated, that is where you're going to see it. So again, I'm in the eligibility overview. Down at the bottom, as they move through that screen, is where they're going to see their SAI. I just covered mine up, but that is where you would see the SAI is right there. And then there's some additional information at the bottom. So in the essence of time, I'm not going to go into the other categories, but know that they can see the answers to all of their questions unless they were FTI information, federal tax information. They can see the schools that they've already had their FAFSA information sent to, and they can see what their next steps are. So what to expect? Again, once that backlog is cleared, that's when corrections will be able to be made. And those corrections will include the ability to add those missing signatures, whether they're on the parent side or on the student side, correct answers to questions. We are hearing that in cases, and we don't know why yet, we're asking the question, that family size has been blanked out. And so if that's the case, they can update that and make sure that they provide that information so an SAI can be calculated. Then they'll also be able to add any additional schools. Some of these students filed their FAFSAs back in January, and since then have decided that there are additional schools that they'd like to apply to. So they will be able to add those schools to their FAFSA once corrections are available. Now, we don't have a lot of details on the FAFSA correction process yet. Once we do, we will share those with you. What we have heard anecdotally is that a student will be able to make corrections, certainly to their information, and that parents, if let's say a parent signature is missing, then it's going to be that the parents will have to log in with their FSA ID and get into their section, and this is how we're not sure, to correct things like signatures. So we do have unanswered questions about the corrections process. We're asking federal student aid to please share as soon as possible those details, and we will get them out to you with screenshots and handouts and resources as soon as we have them available as well. So what to expect from the colleges. So once the FAFSAs have been processed, schools will receive a FAFSA record. Those are referred to as ICERs. So if you hear anyone saying, oh, we're starting to get ICERs, that's what they call a record when it comes to a school or to us at FAME. So we talk about, oh, we've gotten this many ICERs so far. Schools will need to load and test records and finalize award parameters. So loading and testing, going well here at FAME, so that's great. I think it's going well at many schools, but we are hearing that some schools are struggling with this process. It's not like schools had a lot of time to test things. They got test records just in the weeks before FAFSAs actually were processed. So it is requiring a lot of patience with financial aid offices. I used to work in one. You couldn't pay me enough to work in a financial aid office right now because I think it is just so difficult and so frustrating, and the time crunch is just so significant. So, to any of you who are here today who are in the financial aid office, I'm sending you my love, right? Exactly. Thank you, Nikki. And so we really I know parents and students are frustrated. So are school people. We're all in this together, and we just need to support each other through all of this. But once schools have been able to get records, then they can request any additional information, make corrections themselves, because sometimes they're going to be the ones that will make those corrections, and of course, generate financial aid offers. Not only is the FAFSA new in terms of the layout, but the formula is different. So it's going to take schools a little bit to figure out how they're awarding their aid because students have all sorts of different eligibility. Returning students' eligibility looks different this year than it did last year. So it's just they're doing that as quickly as they possibly can. But what that's going to mean is that financial aid offers are still going to be delayed a bit until sometime in April or perhaps even later. Schools are trying to be flexible in terms of their deadlines. Many schools have either moved that May 1 deposit deadline out a bit, maybe to June 1, or if a family isn't able to meet that deadline, I think schools would like them to, ask if they can have an extension or ask if they can have some flexibility. This is where I speak from the FAME perspective more than my old financial aid place. We need families to get financial aid offers and have all of their financial aid offers before they make a decision about which schools they're going to attend, assuming that affordability is one of the primary considerations, which it is for most families. I think one concern we have is that students are going to feel really pressured, and no schools in Maine, I'm not talking about any schools in Maine, but I've seen other schools really pressuring students to put that deposit down without a financial aid offer. So we're really asking students to please, and families to please try and wait because we want them to make that informed decision. Very briefly, I just wanted to say that we did have an issue. We have had an issue. I think we still continue to have an issue to a certain extent with families who have a mixed status. And what we mean by that is those are situations where students have a social security number and are eligible U.S. citizens. They're either U.S. citizens or eligible non-citizens because the student has to be in order to get federal financial aid. But parents, and this is no change in the rules, parents have not ever needed to be eligible non-citizens or U.S. citizens in order for the student to get federal financial aid. What's different this year is that those parents who are not eligible non-citizens or U.S. citizens and don't have a social security number now need to get an FSA ID. In the past, what they did is they simply printed off a signature page, and that's how they signed the FAFSA. But with the new FAFSA, they need to get an FSA ID and they need to fill out the FAFSA, and they have the ability in the FAFSA to say they don't have a social security number. The reality was, until about a week ago, 10 days ago or so, none of these families that were mixed status could do a FAFSA at all. The minute, even if they could get through the FSA ID creation process, which had its own issues, the minute within a FAFSA, they indicated they didn't have a social security number, they could not progress with the FAFSA. That issue has apparently been resolved, at least for the most part. So we want students that are in that situation. I don't think we have a tremendous number of them here in Maine, but we know we have some. We want them to go ahead and now try to submit a FAFSA. But there are definitely still some issues. So I think the best thing to do is just to know that that to reach out to us if they're having trouble, first of all, that contributors at this point in time, those parents who are providing information on the FAFSA, will have to manually enter their tax information. Theoretically, they won't always have to, but they do always have to at the moment. And that it's just not quite working. So there is a handout in the new Mainers section of the FA 101 page. So there's a handout that we put there that can help people who are in this situation. So I'd love to, if you're working with a student who is in this situation, please check out that handout. But again, know that we are here to help. A piece of good news related to FSA ID creation is what was happening is that when parents were creating an FSA ID, didn't have a social security number, the way that their identity is verified is by some questions from TransUnion, and they didn't have to have credit history to see some of those questions. So those are questions that we often see if we apply for credit, but they also exist in non-credit related circumstances. So if parents saw those questions and were able to answer them correctly, their FSA ID was verified. However, if they weren't able to answer those questions, what they had to do was call Federal Student Aid, get a case number assigned to them, have an email sent to them, and then provide verifying documentation. As of about 2 weeks ago, what's happening in those situations where they can't answer those questions or they don't even see those questions, the email is automatically being generated. They still have to provide that documentation, but the email is being generated automatically, so they're not supposed to have to call. So that's really good news. Again, whether that's working 100%, we're hearing rumors that maybe it's not. But just patience there. But please reach out to us if you're having students that are struggling through this part of the process. There are issues that still exist. The best place to find out what issues exist and what the current status is by going to the Knowledge Center. The Knowledge Center is where all the Federal Student Aid updates and information live. You can see that there's an issues alert. Now, not every issue is on this page, though. Know that we are very aware of certain issues that have never even made it to this page, but here's where you will see many of the most significant ones. And you can see there's also quick links to other information that is important. So things for families and students to keep in mind. We want students to contact the financial aid office if they were unable to meet a deadline. So let's say a school kept a deadline and they weren't able to meet it. We want them to reach out to those schools and let them know. We do still have some families with FSA ID issues who cannot file a FAFSA at all right now. So we want them to reach out to those schools and let them know that. We also want students and families to reach out to schools if they need a special circumstance review. So that's basically what we refer to as an appeal. So keep in mind, this new FAFSA formula does not divide by the number in college anymore. So the EFC used to take the parent EFC and divide it in two if there were two kids in college. That is not happening anymore. In the Pell session, we'll talk about why that's not happening anymore. But the reality is that this could be financially impactful for many families. So if families are being financially impacted by the two in college not being the case anymore, not being divided, the SAI not being divided, they can reach out to the school and request an appeal and that they look at that. But what they're going to do, and it's very similar to in the past, sort of a parent was going to college, what they're going to have to do is share information as to how that's impacting them financially. So if it's a case, for example, where you've got two kids in college and one of the students is going to community college, they have free community college, they're living at home, probably doing an appeal is not going to do anything because there's probably not a lot of out-of-pocket expense. But if the kids or the students are going to schools that are costing them more money out of pocket, it is absolutely worth it to reach out to those schools, both schools, and let them know about those circumstances and see if any additional financial aid is available. And as always, we want families to reach out if there's been a change in income or other circumstances that are not reflected on the FAFSA. So just like in the past, if the income currently is less than the income that was on the FAFSA, which was income from 2022, we want them to reach out to the school so a school can take a look at that. If there's a divorce or something that happened after the FAFSA was filed, they should also reach out in those cases. We want them, as I just mentioned, we think it's really, really important that students have the information that they need to make these decisions. So they want to be checking to see if the deadline to submit their deposit has changed. And if it hasn't changed and they feel like they're up against it and they cannot make a decision without that required information, please ask for an extension. We think that that's really important, and schools are doing everything they can to be as flexible as possible. All right, so let's talk about FAFSA filing in general. Not good news here. FAFSA filing is down by about 25% currently here in Maine for our high school seniors. That's not great. So we want to be sure that if you have students who have not yet filed a FAFSA that you're aware of, please have them file a FAFSA. As I mentioned, by and large, FAFSA filing for the majority of students is going very smoothly, and it's actually easier than you would anticipate. So please have them get those FAFSAs done. Even though 25% down is not great, we are actually seeing there are some states that are 50% down. So it's just everyone is down across the whole US. And so we just want to work to get as many FAFSAs completed as possible. We know that one way, that's what piece of information that's helpful to you high schools is our FAFSA portal. So that those of you who use our portal, you can log into the portal, you can see who has completed a FAFSA and who hasn't. Here's the challenge. Until we get all of those ICERs that have backlogged in, we cannot open up the portal. I mean, there's nothing to be seen in the portal if we don't have all those records. So as soon as the backlog has been processed, as soon as we've gotten them all in here at FAME, we hope that shortly thereafter we will be able to open up our portal so that high schools can go in and see for sure who has done a FAFSA, who has started a FAFSA but not submitted it, and who has not done a FAFSA. So stay tuned for updates related to that. Okay. In the last couple of minutes, I just want to highlight a few things related to the FAFSA specifically. There's more information in here that I'm going to really touch on. A lot of it's familiar to you, but I thought as reference for people who check out the slides, it might still be helpful to keep. So the first step in the FAFSA filing process is to create that federal student aid account, what we refer to as an FSA ID. We need people to set those up first. We want people to set those up at least 3 days prior to filing the FAFSA. And the reason is their information has to be matched with the Social Security Administration. If they create a FAFSA, an FSA ID, excuse me, if they create an FSA ID and they use it immediately, if their information has not been matched, their income information will not come over directly from the IRS. So it is one of the things that makes this FAFSA so much easier is because that information comes over directly from the IRS. So we want people to create their FSA IDs early, allow those couple of days for them to get matched, and then do their FAFSA so that that information comes over. If they're just not feeling it, they just want to get the FAFSA done, or if they didn't file taxes, if they're students, for example, then you can go ahead because you can do a FAFSA even if the FSA ID has not been matched. It just means you're going to have to enter income information manually. Again, you've seen this screen before. Here's where you create your FSA ID and log into studentaid.gov. With the new FAFSA, there are 2 sections to it. There's the parent section and the student section. It's a roles-based form now. Either the student can start the FAFSA or the parent can start the FAFSA. It does not matter. We've seen it work in both ways. We've seen challenges in both ways. So whatever way works best for a family is fine. They will go to studentaid.gov. And again, whoever is starting it will log in with their FSA ID. When they log in with their FSA ID, let's say you're working with a family and you don't know whose FSA ID they logged in with, you can go here and it's going to tell you who. So this is where I logged in using my FSA ID. What we want to be sure that people are being really careful about is whoever logged in with their FSA ID needs to be sure they're selecting the role they're currently in when they're doing this FAFSA. So if I'm Mila and I'm logging in because I want to file a FAFSA, I'm going to indicate I'm a student. But in the scenario where I'm Mila and I'm completing a FAFSA for my kiddo, I need to indicate that I'm the parent. Okay, even if in my mind I'm doing a FAFSA for a parent, for a student, that's not the way that it works anymore. So if I'm Mila and I'm the parent, I need to be sure I select that, because if people don't, that's created some of the issues that we've seen this year. Again, the FAFSA is a roles-based form with a student section and a parent section. Whoever starts the FAFSA will invite the other party to complete their section of the FAFSA. And how they will do that is they will provide that other person's identifying information. So if a student starts the FAFSA, one of the things they will do fairly early in the process is they will provide their parent's name, social security number, and date of birth, as well as an email. Those name, social, date of birth have to be accurate. They have to match what's on file with federal student aid and with the Social Security Administration. That is how those two sections of the FAFSA get linked together, is through this invitation. You can see in it what the invitation looks like here. So this is a real live scenario. This is my niece, Ellie. So Ellie started the FAFSA as the student, and she invited my sister to complete her section, and Ellie did that by providing my sister's name, social security number, and date of birth. Now, one of the things that's critical is that my sister is Becky, but her legal government name is Rebecca. So it was really important that Ellie made sure she listed her name as Rebecca, not Becky, because that will cause issues if you don't use someone's legal name, or if you make a mistake with their birth date or social security number. So when Becky did sign in, this is what she saw. She saw she had a pending invitation, and she clicks on that. That's how she gets into the parent section of Ellie's FAFSA and can complete that and submit that. Few other screens I want to highlight is the fact that people do need to provide consent and approval. If people do not say approve down here, this is a long screen, I've just got the top and the bottom, then they are not eligible for federal student aid. So everybody needs to provide consent and approval, even our non-tax filers. Okay, so that's absolutely critical. We are not hearing pushback on that, though, so that's a good thing. The question I was alluding to, that bad unsub question, it was bad enough that they've updated the language in it. So here's what it was looking like initially. So we can see why many students just saw apply and went ahead and said yes to this, even though they should have said no. So they have updated the wording of the question. So with that unsub question, the answer should be no for all students whose parents are willing to provide information. Only a handful of those students whose parents refuse to provide information should be answering yes. Everybody else should answer no. With family size, the way this question is worded, it makes it look like it is defaulted to no, and it makes it look like you only have to check out your family size if it's changed since 2022. We're finding that family size is not being calculated accurately. We want everybody to check yes to this and to verify their family size. So everybody, please check yes to that. Check out your family size. And that's another small thing that I wanted to mention. At the very end, you will see this screen here where it will be a summary of everything that's been provided on the FAFSA. I know it's not really visible, super visible, but see here where it says signature and it's grayed out. Wouldn't you think that's where you would go to sign the FAFSA? It's not. You actually have to scroll all the way down to the bottom, click on continue, and that's how you will sign the FAFSA. So if someone's saying, I'm trying to sign it, but it's grayed out, make sure that they're going all the way to the bottom and clicking on continue. Here's what the parent sees when the FAFSA is submitted. The student will see a little bit more information. They will see their SAI if it was able to be calculated, and the student will also receive an email. The parent does not receive an email when the FAFSA is submitted. Here is what that email looks like. This is the last slide, everybody. Here's what that email looks like. If the SAI, that student aid index, was able to be calculated, that's where a student, until their FAFSA is processed, that is where the student can see their SAI. And up until their FAFSA being processed, it's the only place they can see their SAI is in that email that went directly to the student. If they don't think they got an email, we do feel like emails were sent out consistently. So please have them go back through and do a search. The email came from the US Department of Education with the subject line of "We received your FAFSA form." Now, again, as FAFSAs are being processed, that SAI is now available also in their FAFSA submission summary. And we do expect that those SAIs are going to be different than they were when originally processed. And in many cases, they are going to be lower. All right, how is everybody doing? I'm just going to look at my time here. We have 4 minutes left in the session. Nikki, Jess, Steve, anyone who's monitoring the chat, is there anything that before we end this session we need to address that's just absolutely critical?
There's a question in the chat. Why does the DRN need to be kept private? We at the Worthington Scholarship are seeing many of these. What should we know about keeping this? How to keep this private?
Well, the DRN number is the data release number. So for example, if I didn't list a school on my FAFSA, I'm a student, I didn't list a school on my my FAFSA that I want to have my information, I would go to that school, I could give them my DRN number and they could pull in my record. So that DRN number, not in a super obvious way, but does basically provide access to all of the students' FAFSA data. That's why I believe there's the instructions to make sure that that's kept private. Okay. All right. Well, let's go back to the agenda for a moment. Okay. So what I'm going to do momentarily, and Steve's going to actually, let's do that first, Steve. Steve, we would like to, before we tell you how to move to the next session, we would like to give away some gift cards. So who are we giving those to, Steve?
All right, hold on. Let me pull up my screen here. And so you have to be present to win. So if you're not present, all righty, here we go. The first one is Madeline Shercliffe.
Yay, Madeline.
If you were there.
I don't believe Madeline is with us. I don't see Madeline in the attendee list.
All right.
Got to be with us, people.
All right. Next, and I'm probably not going to say it right, but Kelly Lougie or Lugie, L-O-U-G-E-E. Kelly, are you with us?
I'm not seeing Kelly, guys.
All right.
We created some backup scenarios, so we're good.
All right. I'm moving on, Nikki, down the list. Next, Elena Murray.
Elena is with us.
Yay!
Yay!
That will be coming your way, Elena.
Nikki, did you want her to put her email in the chat so I can record those?
No, actually, I've got them in the registration. I will email everybody to get contact information after the event.
All right, so one more, right, Nikki, for this session? All right, Ruth Ann Cowger.
Ruth Ann with us?
C-O-W-G.
Ruth Ann is here.
Yay, Ruth Ann.
Yay.
All right.
Great. So those are our first 2 drawings of the day. We're going to have 2 more at lunch, 2 more at the end of the day. Do have to be present to win. And then we'll do one of the evaluations as well. Okay. So now let's talk about what's going to happen next. Momentarily, we're going to shut this session down completely. Okay. You are going to hopefully have your agenda right in front of you, and you're going to decide which of the 3 sessions you would like to go to. Whichever of the 3 sessions you want to go to, simply click on that link and that will take you into that applicable Zoom session. Okay, so no one's staying here. We're going to shut this one down altogether. So be prepared to go to whichever session you would like to, that is going to start at 9:30. So we're going to move right into that next session, but know that we then will have a 15-minute break after that session. But do what you need to do. Take time. If you need to run to the bathroom, get some more coffee. I need some more. I know that. Go ahead and do that. Okay, so next session up at 9:30, the session of your choice by selecting the link that is associated with that session. All right, anything more before I close out this one, everybody?
Great job, Mila.
Thanks.